She was almost past the corner when the first voice hit her. Look at her, still walking around like somebody's actually going to want that. Grace didn't stop walking. She had learned a long time ago that stopping only made it worse. Girl, pull that hood down. Let everybody see what you're hiding under there. Laughter, sharp and deliberate, designed to wound. No wonder she covers up. I'd cover up too if I looked like that. Grace clutched her grocery bags tighter against her chest and kept moving. Her jaw was tight. Her spine was straight. Her eyes were fixed on the sidewalk 12 feet ahead of her like it was the only solid thing in the world. She did not cry. She had trained herself out of that years ago. Then she heard it. Engines. 3 black SUVs rolled to a stop at the intersection ahead of her, so smooth and quiet they seemed to appear from nowhere. Every vehicle was identical, dark, tinted, the kind of cars that made a whole block go still without anyone needing to explain why. Grace kept walking. She didn't look at the cars. But from inside the middle vehicle, behind glass dark enough to make the world outside look like a photograph, a man was looking at her. He had been watching for 45 seconds. He had not looked away once. His name was Kwon Jae-seok, 33 years old, head of the Kwon Network, the most powerful Korean organized crime operation on the eastern seaboard. Real estate, private security, tech infrastructure, and several enterprises that existed in no official record anywhere. He was not a sentimental man. He had not become what he was by feeling things he shouldn't feel. But he had been raised by a woman who told him every Sunday of his childhood that character was the only currency that never lost its value. And sitting in the back of that car watching a woman walk through public cruelty with her spine straight and her chin level and not a single tear on her face, he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Respect. Slow down, he said to his driver. His right-hand man, a sharp-eyed man named D, looked at him in the rearview mirror without expression. D had worked for Jae-seok for 8 years. He had learned not to ask questions. The car slowed. Jae-seok watched Grace reach the corner, watched her turn without looking back, watched her disappear. Find out who she is, he said. D nodded once. He already had his phone out. But I need to take you back, because you cannot understand what happened next without understanding what Grace had already survived. Her full name was Grace Abina Mensah, 26 years old. Her father, Emmanuel, had come from Accra to Atlanta 20 years ago with $40 and an engineering degree that American employers spent 3 years pretending not to see. He had built a small but thriving catering business in Decatur through sheer refusal to quit. Her mother, Diane, had been a nurse at Grady Hospital, warm and direct and fiercely protective of the daughter she called her greatest achievement. Grace had grown up loved. Completely, securely, without condition, loved. Then her mother died. Sudden cardiac arrest on a Tuesday morning when Grace was 16. Here one moment and simply not the next, in the specific way of losses that never fully make sense no matter how many years pass. Emmanuel fell apart quietly. He kept working. He kept showing up. But the light that Diane had kept burning inside their home went out, and Emmanuel spent 2 years trying to find it again in all the wrong places. He found Sandra instead. Sandra Ackafer was beautiful in the way of women who have studied beauty as a strategy. She arrived in their lives with warmth and laughter, and a daughter named Tiffany who was 1 year younger than Grace and wore the same smile her mother wore. For a year and a half, things seemed possible again. Then Emmanuel had a stroke. He survived, but he never fully came back. The man who had built a business from $40 became a man who needed help with everything. Sandra became his caregiver, and then his wife, and then, very quietly, the sole owner of everything he had. Grace was 19. She did not fight it. She was too busy grieving to fight. What she did not know, and would not know for years, was that Sandra had been moving money out of Emmanuel's business accounts for months before he died. By the time Grace understood what had happened, Emmanuel was gone. The business was Sandra's. The house was Sandra's, and Grace had nowhere to go and no legal ground to stand on. She stayed because she had no choice. She worked because Sandra required it. She kept her head down because experience had taught her that raising it only brought more pain. The fire happened 8 months after Emmanuel died. Grace had been working alone in the catering kitchen on a Friday night, closing up after an event. The gas line had been leaking. She found out later, much later, that the valve had been tampered with. That someone had loosened it carefully enough that it wouldn't be immediately obvious but would eventually, inevitably, become catastrophic. The explosion threw her against the far wall. She woke up in Grady Hospital 3 days later with burns covering the left side of her neck and jaw, her hands bandaged, her throat raw from smoke. Sandra came to the hospital once. She came with an insurance adjuster. The kitchen was covered. Grace was not. Sandra collected the payout, repaired the kitchen, and reopened the business within 6 weeks. Grace was released from the hospital with compression bandages, a prescription she couldn't afford to fill, and Sandra's verdict delivered in the hospital parking lot. "You can come back, but you keep yourself covered. I don't need clients seeing that and getting uncomfortable. Bad for business." She handed Grace a scarf and a hoodie. Grace put them on, and did not take them off for 3 years. 3 years. 3 years of cooking and cleaning and running errands and being invisible in a home that had once belonged to her father. 3 years of Sandra's comments, delivered with the particular cruelty of someone who knew exactly where to press. "You should be grateful you have a roof. No man's ever going to look twice at you now. You're lucky I keep you around." And Tiffany, who had her mother's timing and her mother's aim. "My friend Marcus asked about you last week. I showed him a picture. He literally said, and I quote, 'Now I'm good.' Can't blame him honestly." Grace never responded. She had learned that silence was her only armor. But silence doesn't stop wounds from forming. It only stops other people from seeing them. At night, she would sit in the small back bedroom Sandra had given her and look at her reflection in the mirror and trace the scarred skin along her jaw and neck and try to remember what it had felt like to be loved without conditions. She was trying very hard to keep believing that kind of love still existed somewhere. She was not entirely succeeding. 6 days after Jai Siak watched her walk through that street, Dee delivered his report. Jai Siak sat at his desk and read it twice. Grace Abina Mensah, 26, orphaned twice. Burns sustained 3 years ago in a kitchen fire, currently living in her late father's house, now legally owned by his widow, Sandra Ackafer, working without pay in exchange for housing. Jai Siak set the report down. "The fire," he said. Dee nodded carefully. "Our contact at the fire department pulled the original inspection records. The gas valve showed signs of manual adjustment. Someone loosened it deliberately. The investigation at the time was closed quickly." He paused. Sandra Ackafer had sole access to the kitchen that week. She collected $180,000 in insurance. The room was very quiet. Jai Siak looked at the report for a long time. He had spent his entire adult life in a world built on power and its abuses. He had seen cruelty in forms that most people never imagined. He was not naive about what human beings were capable of. But something about this particular story, a young woman deliberately harmed, deliberately scarred, deliberately erased from her own life by someone who was supposed to protect her, ignited something in his chest that had no name but was not small. He wanted to meet her. Not as Kwon Jai Siak, not as the man whose name made rooms go quiet. Just as a man. He wanted to know what she was actually made of. 4 days later, Grace was cutting through the alley between the dry cleaner and the closed bookshop on her way back from the pharmacy when she heard the sound. A low, controlled groan, the sound of someone in pain trying not to make noise about it. Most people would have kept walking. Grace had spent 3 years being the person nobody stopped for. She knew exactly what it felt like to need help and find an empty sidewalk. She stopped. She stepped into the alley. A man was sitting against the brick wall with one hand pressed against his ribs. Dark jeans, plain gray hoodie, no jewelry. His face was partially turned away, but she could see the blood seeping between his fingers and the rigid set of his jaw that said he was managing pain through will alone. "Sir," she moved toward him, "are you all right?" His head came up slowly. Dark eyes found hers, sharp despite everything. Korean, she registered, young but with a quality of experience in his face that had nothing to do with age. "You should leave," he said. His English was accented, precise. "This isn't your problem." "You're bleeding." "I'm aware." Grace was already kneeling, already setting down her bag, already assessing the wound with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be. "Let me see." His hand caught her wrist before she could touch him. Strong grip for someone half-conscious. "I said leave." "And I said let me see." Grace met his eyes without flinching. "I'm not leaving you here, so either you let me help or you explain to whoever's looking for you why you're still in this alley an hour from now." Something moved in his expression. He released her wrist. Grace worked quickly. The gash was deep but not immediately life-threatening if pressure was maintained. She used the spare scarf from her bag, folded it precisely, pressed it firmly against the wound. "You need stitches, not a hospital." "Not a hospital." "Then you need someone who can treat this. Do you have someone to call?" "Yes." "Call them now." He looked at her for a moment. Then he pulled out a phone and spoke briefly in Korean. When he ended the call, his eyes came back to her face, or rather to the hood still pulled low over it. She felt his gaze tracing the shadow where her scars began and pulled the fabric lower automatically. "Why are you helping me?" he asked quietly. Grace kept her eyes on the wound, monitoring the pressure. "You needed help. That's enough reason." "Most people would have walked past." "I'm not most people." Another silence. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated. It had been a long time since a stranger had asked her that with what sounded like genuine interest. "Grace." "Grace," he repeated, like he was placing it carefully somewhere he wouldn't lose it. "I'm Jai. If you are new here, welcome to Afro-Korean love stories where love arrives in the most unexpected places and chooses the most deserving people. Subscribe right now because this story is only getting started and you absolutely cannot leave before the end. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. I want to hear from every single viewer in the United States, in Canada, in Australia, in the United Kingdom, and everywhere else in this world. Now let's get back to Grace. He found her again on a Tuesday. She was coming out of the grocery store on Ponce when she stopped dead on the sidewalk. He was leaning against a car parked directly outside. No bandages visible, no sign of the wound. He wore dark trousers and a simple black jacket and looked so different from the man she had knelt beside in an alley that for a moment she wondered if she had imagined the whole thing. "You," she said. "Me," he agreed. "How did you find me?" "I'm resourceful." He pushed off the car and walked toward her unhurried. "I wanted to thank you properly. You saved my life." "I applied pressure to a wound." "Most people would have walked past." "You said that already." The corner of his mouth moved. "Because it's true." He gestured toward the cafe across the street. "Let me buy you coffee as a proper thank you." Grace looked at him. Every reasonable instinct she had said no. She didn't know this man. She didn't know what he did, or who he was, or why he had been bleeding in an alley in the first place. But he was looking at her directly, not at her hood, not at the shadow of her scars, at her. Like she was just a person. She could not remember the last time someone had looked at her like that. "I don't drink coffee," she said. "Tea then." She almost smiled, almost. "1 cup." That 1 cup became 2 hours. He asked about her. Not about her scars, not about what was under the hood, not the questions that people always circled toward eventually. He asked what she read. She told him she loved poetry, especially the romantics and Lucille Clifton. He asked what she would do if she could do anything. She told him about her dream of opening a safe space for girls aging out of foster care in Atlanta, young women who were about to be handed the world with no preparation and no safety net. He listened to the whole thing, without looking at his phone once. "You've thought about this for a long time," he said. "Since I was about 19, Grace said. It never felt possible. Why not? She looked at her tea. Circumstances. He didn't push. He moved on to something else, which was exactly the right thing to do. They met again 3 days later, then again 4 days after that, then again. Jai suggested places, quiet ones off the main streets, the kind of spots that felt like they existed outside the normal flow of the city. They walked sometimes, talked always. Grace noticed things she filed away carefully, without examining too closely. The way waiters adjusted when he walked in. The way space seemed to clear around him without anyone appearing to move deliberately. The way Dee, who she had now seen 3 times, always at a distance, always watchful, carried himself like a man whose job was to be ready for something. She wasn't naive. She knew powerful when she was near it. But Jai had never been anything except gentle with her. Direct, honest about most things, present in a way that felt increasingly rare and increasingly important. One evening they walked along the Beltline as the sun went down over Atlanta and turned the whole sky amber and rose. Jai stopped walking and turned to face her. "Why do you keep meeting me?" he asked. "You don't know who I am, not really." "I know enough," Grace said. "What do you know?" "I know you helped a stranger without asking for anything in return. I know you listen when people talk. I know you see people." She paused. "That's more than most." Jai looked at her for a long moment. "I want to tell you something," he said. "All right. The day I first saw you, you were walking down the street and there were women saying cruel things." He watched her face carefully. "You didn't break. You didn't run. You walked through it with your head up and I couldn't look away." Grace's throat tightened. "You saw that." "I saw you," he said, "and I haven't stopped thinking about it since." The world shrank down to just the two of them in the amber light. Then Grace's phone rang. Sandra's name on the screen. The warmth drained from her face like water from a cracked glass. She answered. "Where are you?" Sandra's voice was sharp and thin. "I have people coming for dinner tomorrow and nothing is prepared. Get yourself home right now." The line went dead. Grace lowered the phone. Her expression had gone blank and careful the way it always went when Sandra called. "I have to go." Jai's jaw tightened. "Grace." "I have to go." She couldn't look at him. Whoever that was. "Please don't." She pulled her jacket tighter and stepped away. "I'll see you later." She walked away quickly. But she felt his eyes on her back the entire way. The invitation arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Thick cream cards stock-edged in gold, addressed to Sandra Ockhafer's household. Sandra snatched it from the mail before Grace could read the name on the envelope. "You are cordially invited to the annual Kwon Foundation Charity Gala. Black tie, Saturday evening." Below the printed text, a handwritten line in precise dark ink. "I would be honored by your attendance." Signed simply with the initials KJ. Sandra did not know who KJ was. But she knew money when she held it, and this paper felt like money. "Tiffany," she called, "come down here, we have work to do." The next 36 hours were a production. Sandra hired a makeup artist, bought Tiffany a gown on credit, researched Atlanta's most prominent philanthropists until she found the name Kwon Jae-seok and spent an hour rehearsing conversation topics. Grace watched from the kitchen doorway. She was not mentioned, she was not considered, she was furniture. "Make sure the house is clean when we get back," Sandra said on her way out, her eyes sliding past Grace like she wasn't there. "And stay inside. I don't need you wandering around embarrassing anyone." The door closed. Grace stood in the empty hallway. She thought about the girl she used to be, the one who walked under the Atlanta sun with her face up, the one her mother had called her greatest achievement, the one who had believed without question that her life had possibilities. She went upstairs to her room. She opened the back of her closet. There, wrapped in tissue paper, was a dress that had belonged to her mother, midnight blue, simple and floor-length and beautiful in the way of things made with real care. Her mother had worn it to her parents' anniversary dinner 20 years ago. Grace had kept it through everything. Through the fire, through the hospital, through 3 years of invisibility. She held it for a long moment. Then she put it on. She did not have an invitation. She did not have a plan. But she was going. The Kwon Foundation Gala was held at a stunning glass and steel event center in Midtown Atlanta that Grace had passed 100 times without ever imagining she would enter. The line of luxury vehicles outside was longer than she had expected. The women in the entrance were wearing gowns that cost more than 3 months of the money Sandra paid Grace, which was nothing. Grace went around to the service entrance, slipped in with the catering staff, moved through the preparation corridor until it opened into the main hall. She stopped. Crystal chandeliers, orchestral music, champagne flowing between tables set with flowers Grace didn't know the names of, and everywhere the specific electricity of people who had real power gathered in one space. Grace stayed near the walls, near the edges, old habit. She watched the room. She told herself she didn't know why she had come. Then she saw him. He was standing at the center of the room in a perfectly tailored black suit, his hair styled back from his face. People moved around him the way water moves around something fixed. Women in designer gowns laughed too brightly in his direction. Men approached him with the careful energy of people seeking something. Jai. But not Jai. This was someone else wearing Jai's face. This was Kwon Jae-seok. Grace's blood went cold. She turned to leave and walked directly into Sandra. What? Sandra's face twisted immediately, the warmth she wore for strangers dropping away completely. What are you doing here? I told you to stay home. Sandra. Look at you. Sandra's voice rose, not caring who heard, not caring at all. Showing up here in that old dress looking like that. Do you know where you are? Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Tiffany appeared from somewhere to the left, champagne glass in hand, and her face opened into the slow smile she wore when Grace was suffering. Did she actually come here? Tiffany said loudly. Oh my God, someone actually has to escort her out. The laughter that followed was the kind Grace had heard on that street corner, designed to wound, landing exactly where it was aimed. She felt the shame, starting its familiar crawl up her spine. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to fold herself back into invisibility and never come out. Is there a problem here? The voice cut through the room like something sharp and final. Jae-seok stood 4 feet away. His expression was completely unreadable. Behind him, Dee and 2 other men in dark suits waited with the stillness of people who were ready for whatever came next. Sandra turned so fast, she nearly stumbled. Her whole demeanor transformed instantly, the cruelty folding itself back under the performance of warmth. Mr. Kwon, I am so sorry, this is just a household matter. She's nobody, she works for us. I don't know how she got in here. She's with me. 4 words. Dropped into the room like stones into still water. Sandra blinked. I'm sorry. Jae-seok did not repeat himself. He walked past Sandra, past Tiffany, past the circle of people who had been laughing 30 seconds ago and were now completely silent. He stopped directly in front of Grace. His eyes found hers. And in them, she saw everything she had suspected and not allowed herself to fully believe. He had known. From the beginning, he had known exactly who she was. You, she whispered. Me, he said, that quiet almost smile. I did tell you I was resourceful. He held out his hand. The room was so silent Grace could hear her own heartbeat. Dance with me, he said. She looked at his hand, at this man, at the room full of people watching her, at Sandra's face, which had gone from purple to something paler and more frightened, at Tiffany, whose champagne glass had stopped moving. And she thought about 3 years. 3 years under a hood. 3 years of being told she was unlovable, invisible, worthless, something to be covered and hidden and kept out of sight. She thought about her mother's dress on her body, and her mother's voice in her memory, saying, "You are my greatest achievement." She placed her hand in his. Bestie, this is the halfway point and your audience is locked in right now. If you're watching this and your heart is pounding, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment and tell me, did you think Jai Siak was going to show up at that gala? Tell me where you're watching from, whether you're in Atlanta, New York, London, Toronto, Sydney, or anywhere else in this world. This story is about to go somewhere you are not ready for. Keep watching. They danced. The orchestra played something slow and sweeping, and Jai Siak led her across that floor with the calm certainty of a man who had decided something and was not revisiting the decision. Grace was trembling. Not from fear. From the specific overwhelm of being chosen publicly, visibly, completely, by someone who knew exactly what he was choosing and had chosen anyway. You're angry, Jai Siak said quietly. You lied to me. I omitted. Is there a difference? He turned her gently, one hand at her waist, his grip sure and careful. I needed you to know me, he said. Not my name, not what people think when they hear it, just me. The man in the alley, the man who drank tea with you for 2 hours and couldn't stop thinking about you afterward. His voice dropped lower. When I saw you that day on the street, the way you walked through everything they were saying without breaking, I knew you were different. And then you saved me without asking a single question about who I was or what I deserved. You just saw that I needed help and you helped. He looked at her directly. Do you know how long it has been since someone treated me like a person rather than a position? Grace's eyes were burning. Why me? She said. You could have anyone in this room. I don't want anyone in this room. His steps slowed until they were barely moving. I want the woman who kept walking when the world was cruel because she refused to give it the satisfaction of seeing her break. I want the woman who has been through fire, literally, and is still standing. I want you, Grace, every part of you. You haven't seen every part of me, Grace said. The words came out quiet and unplanned. Jai Siak's expression softened. I've seen enough, he said. But if you want to show me, if you're ready, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Grace felt the weight of the moment pressing on her chest. 3 years, 3 years of hiding. 3 years of believing that her face, her scars, the evidence of what she had survived, made her something to be kept in shadows. Her hands were shaking when she raised them to her hood. She pulled it down. The gasps were immediate and scattered through the room like birds startled from a wire. She heard Sandra's voice from somewhere behind her, a sound of theatrical horror. She heard Tiffany say something she couldn't make out. It didn't matter. The scars were visible now. The textured skin along her jaw and neck, the reminder of the night that had taken so much from her, the night she had not yet known was not an accident. Grace kept her eyes on Jai Siak's face. He did not flinch. He did not look away. He raised his right hand, and with the most deliberate gentleness she had ever felt from another person, traced the edge of her scar with his fingertips. These are not something to hide, he said. His voice was very quiet, for her only. These tell me you walked through something that would have ended most people. These tell me what you are made of. His thumb moved gently along her jaw. Never hide from me, not 1 inch of yourself, do you understand? Grace broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just completely. The tears she had been holding for 3 years finally came, and they came all at once, quiet and devastating. And she pressed her face against Jai Siak's chest and felt his arms come around her, and she cried in the middle of that ballroom in front of everyone. She cried for her mother. She cried for her father. She cried for the girl who had believed she was unlovable. She cried for 3 years of hoods and shadows and silence. And Jai Siak held her through all of it, his arms steady, his hand moving slowly, carefully against her back. I've got you, he said. I've got you. The morning after the gala, Sandra woke up to 2 things. The first was a photograph on her phone. It had been sent by 11 different people from her church circle. Jai Siak and Grace dancing in the center of that ballroom. His hand tracing her scar while she cried. The caption on every version was the same. Is this your daughter? The second was a knock at the door. 2 attorneys stood on the front step with a civil filing in their hands. Fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress. wrongful appropriation of estate assets, and a separate attachment referencing the fire investigation records, specifically the findings regarding the manually adjusted gas valve and the questions that had never been properly asked about who had access to the kitchen that week. Sandra's face went gray. "You have 30 days to respond," one of the attorneys said pleasantly. The door closed. Inside, Sandra sat down heavily on Emmanuel's couch in Emmanuel's house and understood for the first time what it meant to have harmed someone who was now loved by someone with unlimited resources and zero tolerance for injustice. The investigation moved quickly after that. Jai Siak had people who were very good at finding things that had been deliberately buried. Financial records, key logs, a former employee of the catering business who had seen Sandra in the kitchen alone 2 nights before the fire and had been too afraid to say so until now. The insurance company opened its own parallel investigation. Sandra's bank accounts were frozen within 2 weeks. The deed transfer of Emmanuel's house, which had always looked slightly irregular, was flagged for review. Tiffany's credit cards stopped working on a Wednesday with no warning. Their church invitations dried up. Their social circle, which had always run on the currency of other people's pain, found other pain to feed on and moved along. Within 6 weeks, Sandra was facing criminal charges. Not through violence, not through the methods Jai Siak's world usually employed. Through truth, through documentation, through the system turned back on the person who had weaponized it. When Grace asked him why he had done it that way, legally, publicly, through proper channels rather than the faster methods available to him, Jai Siak said simply, "You deserve to be vindicated in the light." Grace looked at him for a long moment. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," he said. "This was always owed to you." The healing was not a straight line. Grace knew that. Jai Siak knew it too. 3 years of daily cruelty does not dissolve because someone chooses you at a gala. The voice in your own head, the one that has absorbed every ugly thing it was told and started repeating it back, does not go quiet just because external circumstances change. Jai Siak arranged for her to see a therapist, the best one he could find, a woman named Dr. Ose, who had spent 20 years working specifically with survivors of complex trauma. Grace went every week. She sat in that office and talked about her mother and her father and the fire and the hospital and 3 years of being told she was worthless. She talked about what it meant to have believed it. She talked about what it was starting to mean to not believe it anymore. The physical scars were addressed too. A specialist in burn reconstruction, brought in from a clinic in New York, developed a treatment plan that over several months began to change the texture and appearance of the scarring. It would never disappear entirely. Grace was not sure she wanted it to, but the tightness eased. The color evened. She began to look in the mirror with something approaching neutrality rather than the old horror. Jai Siak never pushed her, never put a timeline on any of it. He showed up consistently and asked nothing beyond her presence. Some nights she would wake from nightmares she couldn't quite remember and find him in the chair beside the bed working quietly in the dark. She had stopped telling him he didn't need to stay. He had stopped pretending he was going to leave. They talked about everything. About his life, the weight of inheriting the network at 25 when his father's health failed, the things he had ordered and the things he had done, and the specific loneliness of being surrounded by people who wanted something from you every minute of every day. About her life. About her mother's dress and her father's restaurant and the community center she still dreamed of. "Tell me what it looks like," he said one night, sitting on the balcony of his penthouse while Atlanta glowed below them. Grace pulled her knees to her chest. "It's in a neighborhood that doesn't have enough. Somewhere in Vine City or Pittsburgh, somewhere the girls who are almost adults with nowhere safe to land can find something. Life skills, job training, mentorship. A kitchen where they can cook and a library where they can think and someone who tells them every single day that they are worth investing in." Jai Siak listened to every word. "What would you call it?" he asked. Grace was quiet for a moment. "The Diane house," she said, "after my mother." Jai Siak nodded slowly. "Then that's what we'll build," he said. Grace looked at him. Jai Siak. It's your vision, your voice, your purpose. I'm just the logistics. He held her gaze. Let me do this for you. She looked at him for a long time. I love you, she said. The words surprised her. She had not planned them, but they were completely, entirely true. Jai Siak went very still. Then something in his face opened in a way she had not seen before. Something that had been carefully managed, carefully protected, coming fully undone. I love you too, he said. I have for a long time. I just needed you to get there at your own pace. She reached across and took his hand. He looked down at their hands together. I haven't felt this in a very long time, he said quietly. This specific thing, safe. Me neither, Grace said. Then let's keep it, he said. Yes, she said, let's. 8 months later, Grace stood at a podium. Behind her, in elegant letters above a door that had not existed a year ago, was the name she had chosen. The Diane House. The building was in Pittsburgh, one of Atlanta's oldest and most resilient neighborhoods. It was clean and warm and bright, with a kitchen and a library and a garden and 6 full-time staff members, and a waiting list of 43 young women who needed exactly what Grace had built. The room in front of her was full. Community leaders, city officials, journalists, neighbors, and in the back row, quiet and still and watching her with the expression she had come to know as his most honest one, Jai Siak. Grace looked at her notes. Then she set them aside. I know what it is to be invisible, she said. Her voice was clear and steady. I know what it is to walk through the world convinced that you don't matter, that your pain is too much, that your face, your circumstances, your history make you less than what you deserve. The room was completely silent. I was told for 3 years that I was lucky anyone kept me around, that no one would ever choose me, that the best I could hope for was to stay hidden and cause as little trouble as possible. She paused. I believed it for a long time. I want to be honest about that, because I think a lot of the young women this house is built for have believed something similar, and I want them to know that the belief was a lie told by people who needed you small to make themselves feel big. She looked at the room. You are not your circumstances. You are not what was done to you. You are not your scars, visible or invisible. She felt the tears building and let them come. You are someone's greatest achievement, even if the person who knew that is no longer here to say it. You are worthy of a full life, a safe life, a loved life. And this house exists to say so out loud every single day to every single person who walks through that door. The applause started before she had finished the last word. It was thunderous. Grace stood at the podium and let it wash over her and thought about her mother and thought about her father and thought about the girl who had worn a hood for 3 years and thought about the woman she was standing in right now and felt something settle in her chest so completely that it felt like something broken had finally been mended. She found Jai Siak's eyes across the room. He was not clapping. He was just watching her. The expression on his face was the most unguarded she had ever seen it. She smiled at him. He smiled back. They were married on a Saturday in April in the garden of a house in Cascade Heights that had belonged to Grace's parents and had been quietly, legally, returned to her as the civil case concluded and the deed irregularities were corrected. The same house where Grace had grown up loved. The same garden where her mother had grown roses every summer. 30 people who mattered, fairy lights in the trees, flowers everywhere because Grace wanted flowers everywhere. She wore white, her mother's jewelry at her throat, her neck and shoulders bare. The scars were still there. Lighter now, softer, but there. She had decided months ago that she was not going to cover them for her wedding. She was not going to cover them for anything anymore. As Grace walked across the garden toward Jai Siak, she thought about everything. The hood, the alley, the gala, the Diane house, the long, slow work of learning to believe good things about herself again. She thought about her mother, saying, "You are my greatest achievement." She thought about her father building something from nothing because he refused to stop. She thought about what it meant to have carried their love inside her, even when she had forgotten it was there. Jai Siak was waiting at the end of the garden path in a dark suit with his hair pushed back and his hands clasped in front of him, and an expression that made every single one of their 30 guests feel, quietly and privately, that they were witnessing something real. "You're beautiful," he said when she reached him. "So are you," she said. They wrote their own vows. Jai Siak said, "I watched you walk through Cruelty with your spine straight, and I knew before I knew your name that you were the kind of person I had stopped believing existed. You treated me like a person when the whole world had taught me to expect something else. You let me see you slowly and carefully, and on your own terms, and I understood that what you were giving me was not small. You are the bravest person I know. And I intend to spend the rest of my life being worthy of what you gave me when you placed your hand in mine." Grace said, "You found me when I had lost myself completely. You didn't try to fix me. You just stayed. You stayed until I remembered who I was. You let me build something that belongs to me. You loved me without a single condition, and you never once looked at my scars as something I needed to apologize for. I love you, all of you. The powerful man who moves through rooms and changes them. The quiet man who sits in a dark chair so I don't wake up alone. The man who said she's with me in front of everyone before I had earned the right to believe it. You are my home. You have been since the alley. When the officiant said you may kiss your bride, Jai Siak cupped Grace's face in both hands and kissed her with the full and unguarded honesty of a man who had stopped managing what he felt. Their 30 guests cheered. Dee, standing near the garden wall, looked at the sky. Dr. Ose wiped her eyes without shame. And somewhere, Grace was certain, her mother was watching. Sandra Ockhaffer was convicted of insurance fraud and criminal negligence 18 months after the gala. She served 14 months of a 3-year sentence. The house in Cascade Heights had already been returned to its rightful owner by then. Tiffany moved to another city. Grace heard through someone who knew someone that things had not gone well. Grace said a quiet prayer for her and moved on. She did not have the energy for bitterness. She needed that energy for living. The Diane house expanded. A second location opened in Charlotte, North Carolina. A third was in development in Memphis, Tennessee. Grace spent 2 days a week working directly with the young women who came through its doors. She knew their stories from the inside out. Jai Siak kept his word about the network. It was a slow process, years not months, but the shift was real and measurable. Legitimate operations growing, other operations reducing. The long work of becoming something different from what he had inherited. They fought sometimes, made up always, challenged each other in the specific productive way of two people who are not afraid of each other's honesty. And every year in April, Jai Siak brought her back to the garden in Cascade Heights, where the roses her mother had planted still bloomed every spring, and they danced together in the grass until the fairy lights were the only light left. "Do you ever think about it?" Grace asked him one of those evenings. "That day on the street, what would have happened if you hadn't told Dee to find out who I was?" Jai Siak was quiet for a moment. "I think about it all the time," he said, "and it makes me grateful for every decision I made afterward." "Even the alley," Grace said. "Was that real or did you stage it?" He looked at her. "The alley was real," he said. "I was genuinely hurt, my pride even more than my ribs when you refused to leave." He paused. "But I will admit that when Dee told me which route you usually took home, I may not have done everything in my power to avoid it." Grace stared at him. Then she laughed. She laughed with her whole face, with her head back and her eyes closed, in the garden full of her mother's roses, in the life she had built from the ruins of everything that had been taken from her. Jai Siak watched her. His expression was the one she knew best now, completely open, completely certain. The expression of a man who had found the thing he had stopped looking for and intended to hold on to it for exactly as long as he had breath to do so. "I love you," he said. "I know," she said, still laughing. "I'm serious." "I know that too," she leaned into him. "I love you back completely, impossibly, for every year we've got." He put his arms around her. Atlanta breathed around them. The roses bloomed. And Grace Abina Mensah, who had once believed she was too broken to be loved, stood in her mother's garden in the life she deserved and felt, with every cell of her body, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. And that is where Grace's story ends. Not under a hood on a street corner, while cruel voices told her she was worthless. Not in a hospital room with no one coming. Not in the back bedroom of a house that had been stolen from her. But in a garden full of roses, in a life she built herself, loved completely by a man who had seen her before she could see herself. Sandra Ackhaffer told Grace for 3 years that no man would ever want her. She was wrong. The most dangerous man in Atlanta chose Grace in front of everyone. He chose her knowing exactly what she had been through. He chose her not in spite of her scars, but understanding that her scars were the proof of everything she was. And Grace, who had survived things that should have broken her and somehow hadn't, finally allowed herself to believe what her mother had known from the very beginning. That she was someone's greatest achievement. That she was worthy of a full life. That she was, and had always been, enough. Now I want to speak to you directly before you go. If you watched this entire story, if you felt Grace's pain in that hospital room, if you held your breath at the gala, if you cried when Jai Siak traced her scar and called it beautiful, if you smiled in that garden at the end, then this channel was made for you. Subscribe right now. Hit the like button. Share this video with every woman in your life who has ever been told she was too much or not enough, or that her damage made her unlovable. Because this story is for her. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. I want to hear from every single viewer in the United States, in Canada, in Australia, in the United Kingdom, and everywhere else in this world that this story reached today. And one final thing. If you watched this entire story and you don't subscribe, don't like, don't comment, and don't share, then that silence puts you on Sandra's side. It means you are comfortable with a woman who deliberately harmed her stepdaughter, collected the insurance money, and spent 3 years telling a good and beautiful person that she deserved nothing. We know that is not who you are. So hit subscribe, hit like, leave a comment, share this story with someone who needs it today. Because Grace's story deserves to be heard. And Afro-Korean love stories will keep bringing you more. Thank you for watching.